So I'd like to get a little bit into the sciencey stuff and talk about how our ears prioritize sound. Because it's not just about how loud or soft the sound is. It has a lot to do with function of waveform and what the wave looks like. We tend to think of sound being, based on pitch, rhythm, and dynamics, and those dimensions, but there's also another dimension beyond that we call timbre and sort of the quality of the tone. And the different tone qualities can either cut through the textures or help blend within the textures. String instruments have an incredible advantage when it comes to controlling the tone. You can make an unbelievable amount of sounds in different tones and textures and stuff on a violin, a viola, a cello, or a string bass. The possibilities are endless. If you play a keyboard instrument like the piano or the vibraphone or something, it's a lot harder to do. You do deal with tone and stuff like that, but you don't have near the amount of control. And maybe for some of the woodwind instruments, it might be more difficult too. And I think that's why we always tune to the oboe, is because we get a consistent waveform that comes out of the oboe every time, and it cuts well, and everybody can hear it so well. And so sometimes when we want to cut through, we need to make our tone sound a little bit more like an oboe, and when we want to blend a little bit more, then maybe we want to change our tone to sound more like a clarinet. So for this, we control a lot of our tone and can manipulate a lot of our tone in respect to balance and blend through bow placement and bowing lane. If we're playing closer to the bridge, it's going to change the waveform, and we're going to get a sound wave that has a lot more sharp edges. And if we play closer to the fingerboard, we're going to get rounder waves. When we're playing closer to the bridge, the string can also take a lot more pressure. We can press harder onto that string without accidentally playing a double stop, or without really playing with kind of nasally sounding tone. And so that's one thing that we can do to help sound louder, but also be perceived as sounding louder through the waveform. And not necessarily the same thing is true for playing in the upper bowing lanes, because you can still play pretty loud in bowing lane 5. And sometimes you really do want to play loud in bowing lane 5 if it's a great big fortissimo section and the whole orchestra is supposed to be sounding very loud, but you yourself don't have the melody, you have a supporting line. You're contributing to the total dynamic of the ensemble, but you're creating a waveform that's smoother so that the melody can cut through your sound a lot easier. So if you think of it from a biological point of view, and you're just walking around out in nature, what were our ears designed for, and how were they designed to keep us safe? What sort of sounds do we hear in nature that keep us from being attacked by a predator or bitten by a snake or something along those lines? And so things like rustling of the leaves or a twig snapping or something like that, we hear those sounds, those pops. And so when we play closer to the bridge, we get more of that waveform within the sound. We get those sharper angles, and our ears are designed to detect that a lot more easily than some of the ambient sounds, maybe like the wind blowing or even human voices. Another thing that's very important is articulation. And again, going back to my theater analogy, if you have an actor who cannot be understood, they're not being articulate, they're kind of mumbling and their words are getting lost, it's going to be really hard to identify with the story because you can't really tell what's going on. So a lot of times we have our bow placement, but we also need to make sure that we're articulating, and that articulation is going to help the sound be perceived more clearly. And you can hear this in the human voice as well. We have a lot of words that begin with consonances. We have our S's and we have our T's, and the beginning of each syllable, we have that sharper sound, and our ears are good at detecting that, and that's probably why language evolved the way it did. So if you're using harder articulations, you can use that to be perceived more clearly, And if you want to get out of the way, you can soften those articulations and you can blend better.